Passing data into the modal is pretty straightforward. Here, where we create that modal, we probably want to pass in the place for which we're opening it. That is the place we want to book after all. You can pass data into a modal by adding that component props property to the object you pass to the create method. And that has to be our object, where you can now add any key value pairs you want, like booked place or selected place. The value here will then be this place, so this place property I have in this component. And now this gets passed in as a property to my component, to the create booking component. So in the create booking component, I'll now add this as a bindable property. Here I'll use add input, which you need to import from add Angular core. And then I should use the same name, of course. Selected place is the name here. So let's name it selected place here as well in the create booking component, which is loaded as a modal. And that will be of type place. So let's make sure to also import place here. Now we can interact with that just as we can do in any other component. So here in create booking component, we could, instead of outputting book this place up here, we could access our selected place title here and maybe show the description in here. So we could add a text center property and some padding to the ion content so that this looks a little bit nicer. And then I have my paragraph here with the selected place description. That is possible. And you can output anything you want here about your place, of course. Let's give this a try. If I save that, let's log in, load New York City, book this place, and here is the title and here is the description. Of course, you could also display the image and so on. So this is our way of passing data into the modal. Now, how about closing it and passing data back? For this, inside of the modal component, you of course need to define some condition on when you want to close it. Maybe you have a book button down there that closes it. So ion button book with the color of primary. And that should trigger that the modal is closed, and of course that you also booked the place. So for that we can add a click listener on book place maybe. And we might also want a button here in our main bar. So there we could also add our good old ion buttons wrapper with a slot of primary. And in there add an ion button with an ion icon and a name of close. And when that is pressed, we maybe want to execute on cancel so that here we don't book the place. So you typically want to offer more than one choice to your users. So now we can add these two methods, on cancel and on book place was the other method, I think. Yes, it was. And now in there, to close the modal, you can again inject something where Ionic helps you. And that would be the modal controller. So you simply inject the modal controller from add Ionic Angular, so the same tool we used for opening the modal. And then on cancel, for example, you can execute this modal controller dismiss. And it will dismiss the nearest modal it finds. Alternatively, you can also define the ID of a modal as a third param. And if you don't need the others, you can simply pass null as a third param. Because when opening a modal, which we're doing here, besides setting component and component props, you can also set an ID. So that if you have multiple modals that might be open at the moment, that are overlapping each other or whatever, you can control which modal to close. Otherwise, it will close simply the topmost one, which is perfectly fine here. Now, I said you can pass null for the other arguments, but the other arguments are the interesting thing here. We can pass back some data here as a first argument, or null if you don't plan to. You can set a role, which is a string. That is something you can set however you want. I'll name it cancel, and you'll be able to read that role later so that you have a quick and easy way of finding out which button was pressed, and then that ID I already mentioned. In onBook place, I will also dismiss, but here, of course, you typically want to pass some data. Maybe in this modal, later in this application, people will be able to select a starting and an ending date for when they want to book this place or how long they want to stay there, and you might want to pass that data back. For now, I'll just pass back some dummy message. But again, here you can pass any key value pair you want. This is a dummy message just to show how this would work. And now here the role could be confirmed. Again, these roles are totally settable by you. This is not a limited amount of strings you could use. So we got this way of closing the modal now. Let's see whether that works. Let's log in, go to Manhattan, click book, and let's cancel. Certainly closes it. Let's click book, certainly closes it as well. How can we find out which button was pressed and how can we get the data? For that, we go back to the place where we opened the modal, here. Now here we got that modal element and we present it. Now we can set a listener here with onDidDismiss. And onDidDismiss returns a promise. So we can return this here so that on this main promise chain, I can chain another then block. This now will hold my result data. And the result data, in turn, will hold, if we log it, data and role. So these first two arguments we could pass to dismiss. So let's output both here, result data data and result data role. And let's already use that role and check if result data role is equal to confirm. That was one of the roles we set in the modal. Then I will also output booked here. And I'll not do that if we chose the cancel button, and therefore the role is set to cancel as we did it in the dismiss method. So now let's log back in, open New York, click book. And if I now click the cancel button, we see null and cancel, which makes sense because our role we set was cancel and we didn't pass any data. If I click book, however, we see message, this is a dummy message, and we see that the role is confirmed, and therefore we logically also see the booked output, which stems from this if statement. So this is how you can open a modal, pass data into it, close it, and pass data back, and then use that data, which is pretty much all we need right now, in my opinion.